Terror to Australia was the wild colonial boy.
Under the Felons Apprehension Act, the police were now authorised to take any horse or vehicle, food or firearms from any station or hamlet when in pursuit of Ben Hall and others. The Act also contained draconian measures in favour of the police as to powers of arrest against harbourers, which were very necessary to combat sympathy among citizens that had proved more interested in obstructing the police than assisting them. Ben Hall was now becoming a burden to his friends and family, and for some the temptation of a large reward started to work against him. After conducting hold-ups with little reward in unfamiliar territory north of Molong, around Urea and Black Rock, the gang headed back to an area called Billabong, 12 miles west of Forbes, and property owned by longtime friends the Stricklands and Connollys. In this area the gang believed they were safe from pursuing police. They rested up here for a few days, where there was a discussion by the gang on what course of action was needed to escape the pending law to outlaw them. The discussion centred around them escaping to the Meru River Valley, a fairly remote area south of Mudgee, and a couple of days' ride northeast to Murrurundi, where Ben Hall's family resided. This discussion was overheard and reported to Inspector Davidson by an informant with whom he was in contact with. This information may have been a smokescreen, as the gang could not take any risks with anyone of revealing their true destination, most likely Gilbert's hometown, Kilmore, Victoria, and then Melbourne and a ship out of Australia, probably to New Zealand or the United States, as Gilbert had used this route of escape once before when times had become too hot for him in New South Wales. The bushrangers needed anonymity, and Victoria offered it. For their long trip they would need quality horses and equipment for their escape from justice. The 21st of April 1865 would be the last notable raid Ben Hall would conduct in company with Gilbert and Dunn. Late that afternoon the three bushrangers rode into Yama Station, owned by Mr. Cropper, who, like Mr. Keatley and Mr. Campbell, was outspoken against the bushrangers and wasn't afraid to be out helping police on their forays into the scrub to apprehend the bushrangers. As the gang arrived at Yama Station homestead 6 miles east of Forbes to chastise the squatter Mr. Cropper, they apprehended the cook, then quickly entered the house. The only occupants were Mrs. Cropper and a Miss Ferrand, daughter of the Forbes police magistrate. The bushrangers told the ladies not to be frightened, as they were looking for Mr. Cropper, but they were informed that he was away. Ben Hall then asked for his weapons, but Mrs. Cropper refused to divulge their whereabouts. Hall then searched the house, only to find a small pistol and ammunition, and as a memento Hall took a monogrammed handkerchief of Mr. Cropper's. Ben Hall then ordered some tea made and asked the ladies to join them, but they refused. The gang remained respectful towards the ladies at all times and talked freely of their gun battles and exploits with the police. They also mentioned they would like to attack Mr. Campbell's Goimblia station again due to his continued support for the police. At this point Gilbert took a knife and carved into a stool, B. Hall, Gilbert, Dunn. Ben Hall told Mrs. Cropper he would not harm her husband unless he fired first. He then asked her if she would act as Mrs. Campbell had in helping her husband fight them, to which she replied, "I would." Ben Hall made no reply to this. He then took Mrs. Cropper's son on his lap and commented on what a fine little fellow he was, and he would like to take him into his keeping, to which Mrs. Cropper protested vigorously. Hall then told Miss Ferrand if her father was present, he would make him write a cheque for £500. If not, he would rough him up. As dusk approached, Ben Hall asked if they could stay the night, but Mrs. Cropper said she felt unwell, and could she send a servant girl to fetch a Mrs. Patterson. Ben Hall refused, saying that a servant girl had been the cause of Morgan's death. Ben Hall then said, out of consideration for her condition, they would depart, taking with them horses and equipment. The gang continued west along the Lachlan River and was spotted camped at Monwonga on the 26th of April by a police patrol led by Sergeant Condell, who appeared to give chase, but soon doubled back towards Forbes and reported the sighting to Inspector Davidson, who had, on the 23rd of April, another meeting with the person who knew of the gang's plans intimately and had talked freely to him of Maru as the gang's destination. The two men set up communication on the basis of the informer receiving 50% of the reward, as £1,000 each for Hall, Gilbert and Dunn would give him £1,500 and make him for the day a very, very rich man. The informant's identity was closely guarded by Inspector Davidson, who must have been in contact with him over a long period, waiting for the right moment to act. On the 28th of April, the gang crossed the Lachlan River and moved east, where they robbed the Sutter's farm at Tomamble and the Bowlers station at Gumbidgewa, stealing from them more equipment for their intended journey, as the 10th of May was closing fast. April the 29th arrived and Ben Hall, Gilbert and Dunn failed to appear at Goulburn Jail as demanded by the government summons, and as such a proclamation was issued that if they had not surrendered by the 10th of May 1865, they would hereby be declared outlaws. On Ben Hall's last reward notice, he was described as being 28 years old, 5 foot 9 inches high, stout build, weight 90 kilos, figure erect, respectable appearance, light brown, wavy hair, short, light beard, thick but darker near his throat and jaws, grey eyes, nose inclined to be hooked, and thin, compressed lips. The evening of the 29th of April also saw Inspector Davidson quietly depart Forbes with 8 heavily armed police.
And fight, but not surrender, cried a wild colonial boy. He fired a shot at Kelly, which did bring him to the ground. And he fired point blank at Davis, who fell